April 12th, 1945. High above the Pacific Ocean. A B-29. Superfortress named City of Los Angeles tears through the clouds, its engines roaring like thunder. Inside, 10 young Americans sit cramped in their flying fortress, heading straight for one of Japan's most heavily defended cities, Koriyama. Among them is a 24-year-old radio operator named Henry "Red" Erwin, a quiet man from Alabama with fiery red hair and a humble heart. Nobody knew that in the next few minutes, Red would face one of the most horrifying moments imaginable and perform an act so brave it would make him one of the most decorated heroes of the war. The mission was routine, at least as routine as a bombing run could be in the final months of the Pacific campaign. The B-29s were ordered to drop phosphorus bombs, weapons designed to create massive smoke screens for incoming bombers. But one small mistake in timing could turn the entire aircraft into a flying inferno. He knew that if the canister stayed there for even a few more seconds, it would burn through the floor and ignite the plane's bomb load. That meant not just his death, but the death of every man on board. Without hesitation, Erwin reached down into the fire. The skin on his hands and arms seared instantly. He couldn't see. Both eyes had been destroyed by the blast, but he could feel the heat, the pain, and the weight of that burning canister. Somehow, through sheer will, he lifted it. The flames clung to him like liquid fire. Every movement tore more flesh from his arms. His uniform caught fire, but still, he crawled. Step by step, he fought through the smoke and the screaming heat, clutching the canister to his chest to keep it from rolling back. The path to the cockpit was barely 8 feet long, but to him, it felt like miles. His crewmates watched in shock, unable to help, the fire too intense to get close. When Erwin finally reached the front of the plane, he could barely move. His body was a living torch, but he stood, just long enough to reach the cockpit window. With the last ounce of strength he had left, he threw the burning phosphorus out into the open sky. A second later, the flames began to die. The pilots regained control. The B-29 leveled out, no longer seconds away from exploding. The crew was alive. And then Erwin collapsed. He fell to the floor, his body scorched and unrecognizable. The smell of burned flesh hung heavy in the air. The pilot, Captain George Semerel, immediately broke formation, something unheard of during a mission, and turned the plane toward Iwo Jima, the nearest Allied base. Over the radio, he sent out an emergency call. "We have a man badly burned. Request immediate landing." When the city of Los Angeles landed, medics rushed aboard. They carried Erwin out on a stretcher, his face wrapped in bandages, his hands fused and blackened. The doctors who saw him didn't think he would live for more than a few hours. But Henry Erwin wasn't done fighting. The crew refused to leave his side. One of them, Sergeant Norman Morgan, later said, "He looked like a piece of charcoal. We couldn't believe he was alive. General Curtis LeMay himself heard what happened. When the story reached his headquarters, he ordered something unprecedented. Erwin's Medal of Honor to be approved and delivered immediately. They thought he would die before morning. Within 24 hours, the medal was flown to his hospital bed. His commanding officer, Colonel Robert True, pinned it to his blanket, because there was no uniform left to attach it to. The citation read, "Through unflinching valor and devotion to his crew, Sergeant Erwin saved his plane and the lives of his comrades. But against all odds, he survived. Months of surgeries followed, skin grafts, reconstructive operations, endless pain. Doctors replaced the tissue burned away by the phosphorus. Over 40 operations in total. He lost an ear, most of his nose, and the sight in one eye. But slowly, miraculously, he recovered. When he finally walked again, he was asked what kept him going. His answer was simple. I had to save the crew. That was my job." Henry "Red" Erwin returned home to Alabama after the war, He married, raised 4 children, and worked helping disabled veterans for decades. Despite his scars, he lived a quiet, humble life, never calling himself a hero. He died in 2002 at the age of 80, the last surviving member of his B-29 crew. Today, his Medal of Honor sits in the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, a reminder of a man who, blinded and burning, carried a bomb through fire to save everyone else. A man who proved that real heroism isn't about surviving. It's about choosing others over yourself, even when you know it will cost everything. As the phosphorus canister roared beneath him, Henry Erwin moved through pain few human beings could endure. He couldn't see. His eyes had been seared shut. The flames had eaten through his face and arms, and the bomber's interior was a furnace. Yet somehow, his body kept moving forward, driven by instinct and a duty stronger than pain. He reached down, hands burning, and picked up the molten canister. It seared through his flesh instantly. The smell of burning skin filled the cockpit. No human could hold it, but Erwin did. Cradling the inferno against his body, he stumbled forward through the narrow passageway. Every inch of that plane was alive with fire. Oxygen masks had melted. Men were gasping for air. The pilot, blinded by smoke, was screaming for help. He couldn't see his controls. The only thing between them and certain death was Erwin's will to keep moving. He crawled forward, past the navigator's table and the radio panel that once was his post. His uniform burned away as he fought through the blaze. Every time he fell, he pressed on again, gripping that canister against his chest, knowing that if he dropped it, everyone would die. At last, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the cockpit. Without sight, without strength, he found the small side window, the only chance to get it out. With one final push, Henry Red Erwin hurled the burning phosphorus through the window and collapsed onto the floor. The canister tumbled out into the sky, and the fire inside the bomber began to die. The crew rushed to extinguish the remaining flames. The pilot regained control, pulling the crippled aircraft out of its dive. They were still thousands of feet above the Pacific, but for the first time in what felt like forever, the bomber was alive. The mission was over, but Red Erwin lay motionless, his body unrecognizable. His skin was blackened, his uniform gone. He couldn't see, couldn't speak. The other men thought he was dead, until they heard it, a faint, rasping voice. "Are the boys safe?" That was all he wanted to know. The pilot, stunned, called for medical aid as they turned the bomber toward the nearest base, Iwo Jima. For hours, the crew worked to keep Erwin alive. They poured water over his body, wrapped him in whatever cloth they could find, and tried to keep him conscious. He drifted in and out, whispering for his crewmates by name. When the B-29 finally landed, medics were waiting. They carried him out carefully, every touch causing unbearable pain. One look was enough for doctors to know no man could survive these burns. They gave him a few hours to live, but Henry Erwin didn't die. He was transported to a field hospital where surgeons worked through the night. His burns covered most of his body. He had lost his nose, ears, and parts of his face. His right arm was fused to his chest. Every breath was a fight. Yet, he kept holding on. Word of his acts spread through the Pacific overnight. Generals, doctors, even fellow airmen couldn't believe what they'd heard. A man had picked up a burning phosphorus bomb with his bare hands and thrown it out of a plane. When General Curtis LeMay heard the story, he ordered something unprecedented. Normally, a Medal of Honor request took weeks, even months. LeMay wanted it done in 24 hours. He wanted Erwin to receive it while he was still alive. As the paperwork flew across military channels, a courier was sent to Washington, where President Harry S. Truman signed the approval. By the next day, a small group of officers arrived at the hospital carrying the nation's highest military honor. Inside, Henry Erwin lay wrapped in bandages, eyes covered, barely breathing. His family had been notified. The doctor said he couldn't survive another day. When they entered his room, they didn't expect him to be awake. But he was. His face was covered, his voice weak, yet he somehow managed a faint smile when he heard them walk in. They placed the Medal of Honor in his hand. He couldn't see it, but he held it gently against his chest. For the first time in hours, he spoke clearly. "I'm so proud to serve with such fine men." It was quiet for a long time after that. Even the hardened officers, men who had seen years of war, couldn't hold back their tears. But Henry Erwin didn't die that night. He didn't die that week. Against all odds, he lived. For over 2 years, he endured surgery after surgery, skin grafts, bone reconstruction, endless recovery. Doctors called him a medical miracle. He lost his sight, most of his facial features, and nearly all use of one arm. But his spirit never broke. When he finally returned home to Alabama, the town welcomed him as a hero. But Red never saw himself that way. To him, he was just a man doing his job, saving his brothers so they could go home too. After the war, he stayed in service as a civilian in the Air Force for decades, mentoring young airmen and living quietly with his family. He rarely spoke about what happened that day. When people asked how he did it, he would simply say, "It just seemed like the right thing to do." Henry Red Erwin passed away in 2002, 57 years after the day everyone thought he would die. His Medal of Honor now rests in a museum, but his legacy lives in every airman who hears his name. In the end, his act wasn't just about saving a plane. It was about what it means to be human in the face of hell, to risk everything not for glory, not for recognition, but for the man beside you. A quiet radio operator from Alabama, who once threw fire from the sky, and in doing so showed the world what courage truly means. Henry Eugene Red. Erwin wasn't born into glory or power or destiny. He was born into hardship. Long before the flames inside that B-29 swallowed his world, he grew up in a place where life itself taught endurance. Marion County, Alabama, a rural pocket of the American South where families lived simply, worked hard, and expected little. His father had died when Red was young, leaving the family with almost nothing. As the eldest son, he took on responsibility earlier than most boys ever would. He worked odd jobs, spent years struggling through the Great Depression, and did everything he could to support his mother and siblings. He wasn't loud or arrogant or bold. People described him as quiet, polite, and reliable. A man who kept to himself, but never failed to help others. Red wanted to become a teacher one day. He had dreams, ambitions, but the world had other plans. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, everything changed. Young men across America felt a firelight inside them, some out of anger, some out of duty, some simply because it was expected. But Red? He joined because he believed he needed to serve, the same way he had served his family. He didn't look like the kind of man built for war. He wasn't tall, he wasn't loud, he wasn't fearless. But war has a way of revealing the truth about people. And inside Red Erwin was a courage nobody had ever seen. A man who proved that real heroism isn't about surviving. It's about choosing others over yourself, even when you know it will cost everything. When the flames finally died and the crew regained control, they found Henry Erwin collapsed on the floor of the cockpit. His body was burned almost beyond recognition. His uniform melted into his skin, his eyes swollen shut. But the burning canister was gone, thrown out of the plane because he refused to let his crew die with him. The pilot immediately diverted to Iwo Jima, landing the B-29 as fast as possible. Medics rushed aboard expecting to find multiple casualties. Instead, they saw only one man injured, the same man who had just saved the entire crew. Doctors doubted he'd survive the night. His burns were some of the worst ever seen in the Pacific Theater. They wrapped him in bandages and kept him sedated, believing he was living his final hours. But word of what he did traveled fast. His commanders submitted a Medal of Honor recommendation the same day. It raced through the chain of command so quickly that President Truman signed it almost immediately. A courier flew the medal across the Pacific straight to the hospital. And against all expectations, Henry Erwin woke up. His first question wasn't about himself. It wasn't about the pain. He asked, "Did the crew make it?" When they told him yes, every man survived. He broke into tears. Later that day, barely conscious and wrapped head to toe in bandages, he received the Medal of Honor, and his hospital bed doctors placed the medal beside him because his skin couldn't touch the metal. He lived after more than 40 surgeries and months of recovery. And after the war, he dedicated his life to helping veterans, never once calling himself a hero. Red Erwin's story is simple but unforgettable. When a moment came that should have killed him, he stood up, walked into fire, and saved everyone around him, not for glory, not for recognition, but because they were his crew, and that was enough.